right. Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us. So I'm Kurt Schmidt, and I have the honor of being able to co-host this webinar today with Brian, who is the head of marketing at Parallax. But we're going to be talking today a lot about Brian's background because I think there's a lot of relevance here for a lot of people to learn from. Because before joining Parallax, he ran a 40-person custom development agency. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to walk through a very specific project that cost his firm more than six figures. And the reason why we're going to talk about it is not because it's a cautionary tale. It's more of sharing a map with you, what broke, why things were invisible until they weren't, and then what Brian had to connect together before so anything had changed. So if you've run an agency operations, or if you work in an agency, if you own an agency, this is going to be relevant to you. You're going to recognize a lot of pieces of this. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. If you have, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. And so we're going to start everything, get going here. But again, if you have questions, comments, crying emojis, maybe during this, more than happy to have you add them in there. So sometimes one project kind of can expose everything that's broken underneath. And I've had that happen to me before, right? Where you think a lot of things are going. I've been very fortunate to be a part of some very fast growing agencies. The thing about fast growth is it hides a lot of problems because you can kind of grow over them, or you can pay your way through those problems without having to fix them because you have the revenue and the income and the things that are coming in. So you don't really need to address some of these things. You just kind of look at like, oh, that was a one-time thing and it'll never happen again and all of that stuff. So Brian, why don't you kind of set the scene for us on what we're talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Kurt mentioned, ran a 40-person kind of custom dev shop. Even though I ran it, I answered to the owners. So I did not own the agency, but they'd hired me to run it. Within week 2, I'd come across the first challenge, and this is the one Kurt mentioned, 6-figure loss. So my life is the warning to others. And so here was the lesson. What the client did is we were doing some work. The answer was if nobody can do it, we typically could, or we'd give it a shot. While we were doing it, the client purchased 2 more companies that impacted the overall project, and it changed the scope. And we've all been there, right? Client does a thing, it changes the scope. Well, the project team, absolutely happy to do it. Yeah, we can do this for the client. Let's make the client happy. But as we all know, that comes with implications. And that is A, scope and cost of the project, but B, schedule and the resources that were on that project that have now expanded and been committed. So this was the whole mess, and lack of communication, lack of visibility, horrible systems led to the client having no clue how the scope changed, how much the project cost. And at the end of it, they were really ticked off. And a lot of times, unfortunately, the only negotiation you have is financial with a client. And that's exactly what this was of, we never agreed to pay for all this. We'll pay for some of it, but you get to eat it. And so within week 2, I got to tell the owners I ate $100,000 on a project for a client.
Yeah, I've been in a similar situation, and in those situations, and again, I've been on the owner side and I've been on the person running the project side. I've been on both sides, and typically in agencies, we zero in on one person and we're like, that's the reason why this failed. And what I've found, Brian, is honestly in the past is that's weak leadership. It's why did this actually happen? How can we get better for it? But in fast moving small agencies, sometimes you're like, well, maybe this person isn't a good fit and maybe they don't know what they're doing. How did you determine for yourself, that this was a system failure and not just I screwed up?
Yes. So I think one of the things that this exposed was I say, lack of visibility. And when I mean lack of visibility, I mean zero. So this is going to hurt a little bit, but let me kind of put in context. The systems and tools we had were never designed for what we did. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the accounting system that invoiced was still DOS based. Now remember, we were a technology based firm. The CRM was actually designed for a manufacturing. So it was all inventory quantity based, not project based. We used Asana to actually manage the projects and what was in flight. Only what was in flight. Backlog was never put anywhere. It just kind of sat in a spreadsheet. And then the time card system was kind of duct taped together. I can't even tell you what the technology was, but I will say it looked like Windows 98 at the time.
Yes.
The whole tech stack was a hot mess, which meant I had zero visibility. Here's a good example. When the client wanted to dispute the invoice, I couldn't see the invoice in a DOS system that I had no access to. I actually had to ask the client for a copy of the invoice. And that was a certain level of embarrassment that, hi, I want to dispute your invoice, but can you send me a copy? Because I can't get access to my copy.
That's amazing.
With that lack of visibility, I have no idea what's going on in the business. I'm guessing or going off what my team is telling me.
Yeah. So I guess every day is kind of like, you're just a private eye every day, I guess.
What it turned me in was reactive. So instead of actually managing the business, I was reacting to client problems because either the project, we had a lot of projects that would just slip. We were really unrealistic with timelines, what resources were needed. So everything was just constantly shifting and moving, and nobody had any clue what was happening. So the way I knew a project slipped, my phone would ring and the client would call saying, I haven't heard from you guys in 2 weeks. We were supposed to be at X milestone by now. And then I'm running around scrambling. What happened? Who's the project manager? What was the scope? What was the original timeline? What did we charge them? What did the proposal originally say? So I spent all this time doing forensic analysis just so I can deal with an unhappy customer that never should have happened in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's really challenging. But I mean, was the reason why these projects were brought in like this, was it just optimism? Was it what was the root cause of why some of these things were being sold outside of your capabilities, I guess?
I would say optimism is definitely the thing, right? And so you sit there and you look at it, and when the client says, could you get this done by the end of the year? Because we have budget or we have to be this by then, you want to tell the client yes. You want to be the firm or the agency that goes, yes, we can do that for you, because if not, they're going to go find somebody else. So you get that optimism. And again, my sales team had quotas. They're incentivized to sell, and they will sometimes overhype the project or, yeah, we can do it in 3 months, when the reality is it should take 4. But I must have heard it a million times. We'll figure it out. That was literally our answer to any problem. We'll figure it out with no strategy. So usually out of the gate, the expectation with the client is already out of whack because we told him a story to get the business. By the way, and then my project manager, people and everybody's going to work on the project go, who the heck agreed to this? We did so we could get the business. So let's figure it out. And of course, it takes exactly as long as the operations and project team said, but it didn't matter what we told the client from a sales point of view. We'll tell them whatever we needed to get the business. That's where I would get in the middle. Instead of, hey, before we put this proposal in front of a client, how close to reality is it? Including, have we done this before? And if we did, what did it really take? None of that visibility was happening, where even stuff that we did repeatedly, I couldn't even tell you what it typically cost on average per client.
Yeah.
I told you my life is a warning to others.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, again, that's the really hard thing, because a lot of agencies are built literally their foundation is not expertise. It's not a business plan. It is not expert capabilities. It is optimism. It is, as my mother would say, gumption. grit. And a lot of, you'd be surprised it's how many of these giant agencies were built initially just off of pure willpower. It wasn't because they had a better business plan than other people. And there's a whole other show we could do about that. But, I think when you ask a client for a copy of their own invoice because you don't have it is really, that's got to be the point where you're like, there is a big problem here.
I think that was probably my breaking point, because I was able, I would make excuses and say, this is what it is. We're trying to run the business. I'll figure it out. And most of the chaos was hidden from the client until we missed a deadline or they got the invoice. But that was the point where that was the experience with the client. And once that started bleeding out, my chaos and the mess and the systems and lack of visibility and it all, once it bled into the clients, that's when I knew I had a problem. And there's nothing like closing your day when you're sitting there and your partner says, "How was your day?" And you're like, "Well, I had to ask a client for their own invoice because our systems are trash." How embarrassing was that?
I had to write off a third of the project.
Yes.
I had to give away all of that.
So let's kind of get to that 100K.
Yeah,
right?
let's get to that.
Of course, as I was telling the story, everybody goes, "Well, right, they acquired 2 new companies. They're going to do this. The scope is going to change." But the client, their vision of what the scope would change and what the reality was were a gap. And we didn't communicate it to the client. I mean, there was no change order. And I've been a big proponent of change orders because it protects the business and it protects the client. Hey, this changed, and because it's changing, we're going to charge you this. And this is your documented proof that when we charge you more, or if there's a problem, hey, you said this was the change. We did none of that. So the client was thinking, yes, it's going to be more, but not 3 times. But the reality is the work was company 1, 2, 3. Same amount of effort per company. The scope tripled. The project team didn't communicate it because they're like, well, the client told us to do it, so we did it. Client gets the invoice. It is ridiculous. They're like, whoa, this is way out of whack that what we thought. We never agreed to this. We never signed anything. We never anything. So at the end of the day, we landed on what their price they thought it was, what the reality was, and we met somewhere in the middle, which meant I wrote off a massive chunk of those 2 other integrations.
Right.
And I won't even get to the moving the project, what it impacted other projects and other clients, just to do work that in a sense was almost free.
Yeah. And tell me about the aftermath of this. Was like, how did it, once those decisions were made, then were you able to close out the project? Or did the client just take their stuff and leave?
We closed out the project, but it definitely left a bad taste in their mouth. Unfortunately, they acquired 2 more companies later, and they did not give us that business, which I can't blame them. So even though we got the client, closed out, we did the work, everything worked, it was fine. I wrote it off, as I said, within the first couple of weeks. That's a great thing to tell the owners. But we finished the work, but because of that lack of communication, why would they let us do 2 more, even though we did great work? The thing that was interesting was the owner of this business had even said, where you guys fell down is you never really communicated and you had no clue what was going on. The right hand had no idea what the left hand was doing. When you, the owner of both businesses, were talking, you had no clue what was happening and you had to go ask questions. He's like, it just isn't a great experience. Happy with the work, the actual work. They love the work. It was just the way we did business. And to me, that was a stupid way to lose a client when they loved our work.
Yeah.
We just screwed up actually talking to them. And I screwed up because I couldn't actually communicate to them what was going on.
Right. Well, again, you've got your pipeline, you've got your projects, and you've got capacity and all these things you have no insight into how these things interconnect, right?
Yes. Well, and it was probably a different challenge because I would say my two most experienced and expensive resources on my team were on this project, which meant once the project tripled, my two top resources were now locked up. And you were like, well, now what does this do? Because they were supposed to start this work for this client. By the way, nobody told that client that their project shifted 2 months.
Right. Well, who wants to have that conversation?
And I think that was it, was they wanted to make clients happy, which I absolutely loved about the team. But they struggled of, I don't want to deliver bad news, so it's better to just ignore the problem and Brian will clean it up later.
Yeah, sure.
That honestly became how everybody thought was, we'll do it and Brian will fix it later.
Yeah, right. We'll just toss it over the fence there.
I know that's never happened to anybody out there.
No, you're pretty unique there, I would say. But tell me about like the idea of it also, again, sounds like you had the information in places. It just, there was no way to combine it all and communicate it, right?
Yes.
You could make
kind of maybe
spreadsheets
even
and stuff, right?
At the end of the day, I would wake up every morning and I would ask myself two questions. Do I have enough work for all the mouths I have to feed? I mean, I was responsible for those 40 people and their jobs were depending on our ability to get business. But I also had to make sure that the business we're committing to, we can actually deliver. Yeah. And between those two things, a lot of time, I was guessing. And the fact that I would wake up every morning and guess about that was the problem. So I had opportunities in a CRM system, but I mentioned it was manufacturing based. So literally all it had was a dollar value. It couldn't tell me this project requires two developers, a project manager, a tester, nothing was ever tracked. So they would attach a spreadsheet into the opportunity, which was fine. But then I had to pull each spreadsheet out of every opportunity to try to merge it. Then we had the stuff that was in flight coming from Asana. Great information. But again, I got information here, And then the problem was the backlog, which was already sitting in spreadsheets because that was the spreadsheet from the opportunity. And once we close it, they move the spreadsheet to the backlog. Those three pieces of information are the things I had to have to say, well, if we win these two deals based on this and based on these things waiting, what does that mean? So I would spend most of my week starting on Monday. I'd get the time cards. I'd then go get the CRM data. I'd do this, I'd do that. Unfortunately, I pride myself as an Excel wizard over the years. So I was able to build this very complex. I was very proud of my spreadsheet, but that was the problem. It sat in a spreadsheet. It took an entire week to give me a view. So by Friday, maybe Thursday at the earliest, I knew what was going on in the business to then start Monday all over again. And I think, again, back to that, we said reactive. A leader needs to work on the business, not inside the business. And I think that's where it was. I wasn't growing the business. I wasn't looking at, do we need to hire people? No. How do we need to go look at different markets, clients? What are none of that. I was actually doing, which is what the owners hired me to do. Yeah, I would say, again, like and everybody's spreadsheet is kind of like how they like their food cooked, right? Like everybody likes a little different thing to it, right? There's, again, like spreadsheets were made to try to standardize things, but nobody really uses them in a standard way either. So even if your process is like, oh, here's the template of the spreadsheet, go and use this to like fire up a new project and do whatever. Everybody's going to put their own seasoning in there and make changes and do different things. So if you have to come back in and triage things, there's going to be a lot of confusion there as well, right? So it's
it's not even just about how you're using or I said not about the tools, it's how you're using these tools, right?
And using the spreadsheet. At one point, I tried to then say, okay, I've got this thing. So can my project managers actually update the spreadsheet and do those? So at least it was like I built my own little fancy dashboard with all my fancy charts. And it was like, if I can just get them to update, but they'd update it. And I'd build all these complex, really cool formulas I was proud of, and they'd break them every time. So we actually reached a point where the spreadsheet was so complex, I was the only one that knew how it worked, which meant my project managers couldn't update things live. They would email me, and then I'd go update it, which again, it's funny as I look back on it, Kurt, of the level of insanity as you're living in it, that when you look back, you're like, why was I... The fact that's a thing I was even doing with my time as I look back is just, I have no excuses for it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's part of it becomes part of the culture, right? As you're, you can't see the forest for the trees when you're deep in it.
And we haven't even talked about margin on any of these projects, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's get there because again, given the write-offs and the margin and all these things, I'd love to hear about. I'd love to hear about your experience with that.
Yeah, we operated at least how I had even seen many of we work with other project-based clients. And so, we'd seen how others did it. I would get my financial report at the end of every month, broken down by project. Too late. I can't do anything about it. I mean, there was nothing worse than watching margin eroding on projects that were closed.
Yep.
And I was like, well, okay. Then I would ask, well, can I see the current margin estimates on projects that are either in flight, getting ready to close? What did we say it was at the beginning? And the answer was, great question. We don't actually look at margin or anything until the project actually closes. I mentioned the whole DOS accounting system, which will, set that aside. But I'm now reactive and trying to get ahead of it. Like, okay, well, if we literally broke even on these 3 projects last quarter or last month, what do we need to do? So I'm adjusting future projects to make up for past projects. And that is not a way to run the business. Just the fact that I couldn't say, are we on track to hit the financial goals of this project? Mm-hmm. The fact that nobody could tell me that answer was another huge challenge. I'm responsible for the profitability of every single project, but I can't do anything about it at all while they're in flight. I can just look at the past and say, oops, I guess we'll try to do better in the future. And by the way, how are we going to do better in the future if I can't see how we did until we're done and all time cards are in and all invoices are sent?
Right. Yeah.
So all of it, as I said, it was the perfect storm of.
It's not just the project, but again, it's the system is that it's all relying on you, right?
It is, and I think that was the interesting thing, is being brought in as a new leader of a business to say, we need you to figure this out. And you went, right, but to figure it out, I have to see things, and I can't see anything to figure it out, right? And I think I've always been a data person. Like, I've always used it and had visibility. And the minute it's gone, to even understand, I couldn't even tell you probably my top 10 most profitable clients at the time. We eventually got there, but that's something I should know. I even said, who are our 10 least profitable clients that maybe we should fire? Nobody can answer that question. So those were the things as a business leader you were thinking about to run the business, but no answers.
Yeah.
Hey, who are the clients we're losing money on? It was an anecdotal story from people.
Yep.
No data to back it up.
Yeah.
So and that was what was most frustrating, is how do you have confidence making a decision about the business that you're beholden to owners when you're guessing?
Yeah.
That was my biggest stressor.
Again, the thing that I found, the thing that's been so frustrating for, my 20 years in working in agencies is that all these systems that we are connecting to, everything that from, these spreadsheets but even up to like a HubSpot or a Salesforce, these things are built to ship products, not to provide services, not service-based from the ground up software. So the struggle I always had is that we would get, when I was at Nerdery and we were, 500 some people, we'd get NetSuite coming in and pitching us as an ERP system. And we'd be like, well, how does it do this, 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 and this? And they're like, well, you can customize it to do this. I'm like, oh God,
yeah.
But we had built a custom ERP system internally, which a lot of people said was a really dumb and bad idea. But the thing is that there was nothing else that could run a professional software agency of that size, that lean, right, with less overhead. And so we had to make it ourselves because it just didn't exist. And that's the thing that I see when I work a lot with agency business owners today, is that there's just a lot of gaps in the software that we have available to us today, that they are built to ship SKUs. Like they are built not to track timesheets and capacities and all the stuff that we have to deal with on a normal basis, right?
And being a technology company that lived in this world, like we knew it. I mean, it was actually funny. We'd sit around and laugh. We're like, you realize if we took 2 developers and let them go dark for a month, they could build exactly what we wanted.
Right.
But we couldn't get out of our own way. Also, we knew all the systems that existed. I mean, our value proposition as a business was get the tools that work for you and we'll make them work together, instead of go buy something that does a little bit of everything, but nothing anybody wants.
Yep.
So using your example, a business would pick their CRM system that was right for them, not this was it. Well, then this is our billing system and this is our time system and these are the things. And now you make them talk together. And that was the thing, was probably 20 years ago, that dates me. The answer was, well, get one system that tries to do everything, because systems talking to each other is hard. That was 20 years ago.
That's also a problem, yeah.
Right. Now, if you said this software doesn't talk to this software, or this software can't see this software, you'd almost be shocked in this day and age. So this idea of you can get systems that are designed for purpose and make them talk to each other and get the visibility you need is easy in this day and age.
Yeah.
It's just sitting down and saying that and thinking about it and saying, what is it, using your example, what's a CRM system that would actually allow us to track resources as part of the opportunity, right?
Right.
Here's a project system, but what's our backlog? Is the time card system really designed for projects and making it easy for people to put time on the projects and things that they work? And to your point, the vast majority of software is designed for people that sell inventory items. But for those that sell, again, how you price it is one thing, but at the end of the day, your biggest asset is your people, and you sell time. There are systems out there designed for it. It's just, they're not the biggest majority of, like you said, a NetSuite, all these things, but they exist. And I've always said, use the tool that's right for the job, because they existed. Actually, what was funny is we probably had 3 project-based systems that we had helped clients with in the past. We knew this. It's what we did.
Yeah.
So I think that was the other thing that was always a struggle, is when you're struggling with the thing that as an agency you do for a living, it almost kind of gets maddening some days.
Yeah, it does. Well, again, you're hoping that, and I would find, talking to leaders, they're like, well, I just, I'm sure there's something out there, I just don't know what it is or something.
Yes.
It's like you can Google all you want, but I can tell you what you're imagining really doesn't exist. You got to stitch it together, because it's that kind of world we live in. And again, I know this is a Parallax webinar, so I'm going to do my little pitch here. But what I love about Parallax, and as a person who ran an agency and used Parallax, it was this great foundational sort of pivot point because I could change out my CRM and it didn't matter. I could change out my invoicing and payroll and all this other stuff that I could change out my timesheet stuff, but it all fed into this one central location where it could parse the data and the data would stay accurate. It didn't matter where it was necessarily coming from, but the way that it processed the information helped me make better business decisions. And so I'm not saying that there should be one thing to rule them all out there, like an agency ERP system. I know people have tried that in the past, but again, an MRR social media agency that's focused on monthly recurring revenue versus a custom dev place versus an advertising agency that gets their budgets once a year. They all operate very differently. And so, but again, most of them are tracking time against work. And that's the one thing that is common along a lot of them. And that's where I think, the idea of Parallax and why I've always been a big fan of it and why I'm really happy to be here hosting this is because I think it is that crux point that can just be that solid pillar in the middle of business.
Well, and I think even when we would advise clients, and including ourselves, I mean, one advantage with thinking about like not one big system, but things that were designed for purpose. One, it distributed my risk in a system. If I implemented a system and it was failing a certain part of the business, I'm kind of locked in. Or this team hates it, but this team loves it. And we would have that happen with clients all the time. But let's use the project. Take Asana. If my project team didn't like it and they wanted to propose a different tracking tool and we decided to do it, well, I can pluck that out, pluck a new project tool. I didn't have to change my CRM. I didn't have to change my billing. I didn't have to change all of this.
Yep.
The technology existed where I could have a layer above it that said, let me bring all this together instead of trying to find a tool that does all of it.
You're right.
This is great at this. This is great at this. This is great at this. Is there technology that can sit above it and bring that information to me and make it make sense without me having to put it in spreadsheets? We'd implemented those things for our clients for 10 plus years with the current technology that's plug and play. So we knew it was possible and we knew the right way to go about it.
Yeah.
It was just, okay, when are we going to get out of our own way or be able, and this is I think the challenge for many leaders in agencies. What happens when you want to pull your billable resources to fix something in the business that will make the business run more efficient, but you have to justify why you've pulled billable resources from work. And that was always the struggle and justification. Yeah, we need to do it, but not right now. This is more important. They're more important on this because it's billable. So
kick the can down the road.
Yeah. And so it's, we were the cobbler's son who did not have new shoes.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, it's a double-edged sword because I've seen where agency leaders, for example, there's usually two kinds of agency owners. They fall into one of two buckets, or people who start agencies. They are either people who don't know anything about this type of work, but they tripped and fell into this opportunity to run this agency. You know what I mean? Like they bought it from somebody, they inherited, I don't know, whatever the case may be. And then there are people who are actual like craftspeople that slowly build up a book of business and then start hiring people. And all of a sudden, poof, they are a CEO. But here's the thing here's where those a very different things, but here's where they're kind of the same is that after about 5 or so years of grinding, they will start to look at other leadership opportunities. So they might join a Vistage or, some of these CEO groups, and they'll sit down across these other CEOs. There'll be, you'll sit there and there'll be a CEO of a manufacturing company, a CEO of a paper company, a CEO of an insurance company. And all of them are using NetSuite to run their businesses. And when you're talking about your issues, they're like, why are you being dumb? Why don't you just use an ERP system, or why don't get SharePoint in there, and SharePoint will do that. And that's what we use this, you know what I mean? And so you're like, yeah, I need to explore that. And then you start looking at it and you're like, no. And then you start thinking, well, you might start, I've seen some owners be like, well, there is no solution out there.
Mm-hmm.
They just give up. Or kind of to your point, they really try hard to cram something in that was never meant, and they end up using 10% of its capabilities, but paying 100% of the cost, right?
Well, and then, and that was actually another interesting aspect, because again, as I laid all this out, it's like, okay, but if we're going to do this, how do we do it? How do I tackle it? And by the way, I got owners that I'm getting ready to go ask them for time, money, something to go fix this. And it's going to actually impact the business while we fix it, but hopefully it'll get better.
Yeah.
What was interesting was, even as we had the discussions, it was all about the name brand, right? The thing that everybody hears all the time, the big names. And they're great. Again, we'd worked with them, we'd implemented them, we'd done a lot of work, but they were never designed for a project-based business that sells time.
Yeah.
They exist. We knew of several of them that were, but they're not the big names that you would think of, because it's very niche to the purpose. But while you can pick name brand, and that was always the thing, I was like, I can pick these big name brands, but they're not going to do what we want to do. And by the way, that's how we ended up with a CRM system designed for manufacturing, because it had a name brand. It was actually designed for our business, which, at least to me, as I've worked in that world, getting something that actually works always was more important than, great, it's a name. The name meant nothing. All the name meant was, this is what the vast majority of businesses use, but the vast majority of businesses aren't like mine.
Because if you think about the landscape out there, right, in a continental US, how many marketing agencies are there right now, right?
Yeah.
12,000, 20,000. That's just marketing. It's not something Microsoft is going to build something for.
Absolutely. Because they want to build for the biggest market they can.
Right.
And absolutely they should. If I was, I don't fault those businesses, I would make the same decision.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's why a not-for-profit needs something to manage their membership. Well, they don't look at the name brand. They look at tools that are designed specifically for that. And I think we're seeing that more and more, especially over the last 10 years, because it's easier for software to talk to each other. So this idea that, well, I don't necessarily have to go with the big name. I can pick things that are designed for my project managers. This is the tool they love. This is the time card system that's at the least painful for everybody to use. This is the CRM system that actually has the mobile capability for my team in the field. I could make those choices without compromising teams.
Yeah.
And that's why I said I had the advantage, because I lived in this world, to be able to research systems. But what I'll say is they exist. So don't feel like you just have to pick what everybody else picks and will make it work.
Right. Yeah, I think that's key, because it's so funny about this dichotomy. Again, this could be a whole other webinar, so I apologize, but we in those types of things, we're doing so much research on our own right now, right? But because of AI and all these different things, like there's a lot of times the deck is loaded sometimes with what we're looking for, and it's pointing us towards things that, well, they just have a lot more budget, so that's why we're getting pushed towards them, right? Because they can advertise more and do all that stuff. So if it looks really good too, it must be good too, right? Like,
exactly.
But again, put that into perspective of cars, right? Like, just because some look really good does not mean they're going to function.
As I said, when my daughter was born, if I had gone out and bought a 2-seater sports car, I'd have been drugged behind it. But, it's great. It's got a nice name brand. It looks sweet, but it doesn't. And I think here's the thing I've learned, regardless of what your industry or what you do.
Yeah.
If there are other businesses like you, there are tools out there. Yes. So like I've always found that there is likely a tool that is designed for exactly what you're looking to do. even though it may be a little bit harder to find. And to put it in perspective, we worked with a company once that had a specific piece of software for shrimpers, people that farm shrimp. So when there's software for shrimp farmers, professional service organizations that time is their biggest thing and asset, as Kurt said, thousands, which means those companies are using something, and in all likelihood, it is built specifically for that.
Yes. Yeah. Again, it goes back to the days of clipboards and things, right? We've got our sheets and our carbon copies and all of that stuff. And our sheets are designed exactly to count shrimp versus count widgets versus count hours that a developer is spending on a project, right? There's very different needs. So Brian, tell me about, when, I just want to hear, I guess when you came to Parallax, the idea of what this software did and stuff must have really struck home for you.
Well, actually, it was one of the reasons I had joined Parallax around that, right? It was all the things I complained about and the nightmares that I lived. I saw, I was like, this is the thing.
Yeah.
My life is a warning to others. And that's where I went like, okay, I talk a big game about all the data and things and how I looked at stuff and what I could do. So the question is, oh my gosh, there's something that actually does these things and did all the stuff that I was trying to do. And eventually being in the tech world, I went, yeah, that's what I want to be closer to and help people not do the things I did.
Yeah, right. And it wasn't, to your point, it wasn't created because there was just this gap in the market, is because the people who founded it lived this gap just like you did.
Yes.
We're trying to solve it. It wasn't that they were like, oh, this is an underserved market, and so the margins will be really good. So let's, from a business case, they were trying to solve a problem that they were experiencing for a long time. And I feel like, again, yeah, it's a business. We're here to make money. But again, like the reason why it was founded was because of people that actually have been in the trenches.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and another thing I'll maybe point out was that a lot of times we don't think of is, remember, I was beholden to owners. So it's easy for me to say, this is a mess for me, but it wasn't my money. It was their money. Right. And so, I have to go back. As I said, I'm brand new to the business and I have to go beg for money to completely gut our entire systems. Chaos is not a reason. You cannot put a dollar value on chaos, but you can put a dollar value on increased business or losses. And so it was easier for me to say, hey, you remember that 100,000 I just wrote off? Do you know how much the business is written off over the last year? If it's only going to cost me $150,000 to put in an entirely new system and get it wired, and we wrote off $250,000 last quarter, it roughly becomes a no-brainer other than time and how is it going to disrupt the business. The financial discussion was over. They will happily spend $150,000 to fix a $250,000 problem. But that they were financially motivated on the success of the business. So the minute I could tell them the story that the success of their business is at risk if we don't fix this problem, made sense. All right, let's go fix the problem. And so that was it. I had to, for those that have to deal with others, you have to make that pain so obvious that the decision is almost a no-brainer.
Yep.
And that's what I had to explain to them, because in a sense, I can't do the job you've asked me to do right now with these tools.
Yeah. Because
it's literally like asking me to build a house with a squirt gun.
Right. Well, it is. But at the same time, these big changes are not just technology shifts, they're cultural shifts, because it's how people are working and how they're comfortable working, I've been there before. I'm sure you've had lots of discussions like this, pulling people out of their precious spreadsheets that they've spent years crafting and like just like working on it, like it's challenging. That's not, you could put a lot of stuff in front of them and like, look at this magic tool. And they're like, yeah, but I didn't make it.
Well, and that spreadsheet was mine, and I coveted it. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I used to joke that I was going to submit some of my formulas to Microsoft's formula contest every year to see what was the most complex formula somebody could build. I was proud of that complexity. And again, I shouldn't be. Like, the fact that that's what I was doing to make decisions on my business, and that's what I was spending my time on.
Yeah.
No, not a good choice.
2019 Pivot Table Award goes to.
Yeah.
I just honored to be nominated. I love that. Yeah, I mean, again, back to that. I want to just, before we get going here, Brian, I want to touch upon that because we talked a lot about the technical aspect of things, but that cultural aspect of making that change happen. What did you find worked and what didn't work? Obviously, like you said, you had to bring it and make the pain obvious, right?
Yes. Now, the team, when it came to new systems, they were all on board. They knew the math.
They were tired. They were tired of not doing well.
They were tired of it, but over the years, they've just been told it is what it is, right? Figure it out. We're too busy to do this. And so the workarounds and everything happened. The biggest shift I had to make was actually just communication across everything, right? Mm-hmm. How do you deliver bad news to a client? Bad news sooner rather than later. I mean, even our clients would say, I'm expecting things to go a little wrong during this project. Just tell me, right? Don't hide it from me. Don't lie. But we also had to implement all these processes like, okay, the proposal. Before that proposal goes to the client, did somebody in ops review it to say this is realistic? Yes, what you're proposing to the client, we actually can deliver. Well, we now add visibility into these things. We're in the CRM. You actually have the resources that are proposed and the timeline and the milestones and those things to review. We then had the backlog, right? So the team could look at the backlog and say, right, but we've slated this for this, and we've got Suzanne on this one for these next 3 projects. There's you committed or you want to commit to the client that Suzanne can start on this date.
Okay.
But the teams wanted that visibility, but it was getting them to understand that data and information actually made everything better because the clients were no longer ticked off.
Yep.
They're being communicated with. The timelines are now actually realistic. We started doing change orders. So any of these surprises weren't happening. We would do project reviews weekly on the project margin timeline. So if anything's now going sideways, we can actually adjust. Yes, the tools gave us the data, but those key processes changed the way that we looked at it. And again, I was self-motivated because I wanted to quit dealing with unhappy customers.
Yeah, exactly.
No one wants to wake up and do that. No one gets into this just to say, you know what I want to do? I want to listen to customers scream at me all day because we literally could not communicate to them. It was the biggest thing that our clients would complain.
Now, there was a good 3 years of my life where as a leader, I didn't talk to a happy client for years because as a leader, no client wanted to talk to me unless there was a problem, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. All right, Brian. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today to share your story, your tale of woe, your warnings. They're very important. Again, like I tell people, I didn't get good at this because I was good at it. It took some knocks and stuff. So, I'm excited to be here and with someone like yourself that's willing to share their story and have people learn from it and other people. So I really appreciate you taking that time, Brian.
If you walk away with just one, oh my gosh, that's a nice warning, then it was worth it. I always will say, please don't. I hope nobody has to go through what I have gone through. I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
I wouldn't wish it on anybody. Me too, man. Me too. So thanks everyone for taking the time out of your busy day to join us on this Friday morning. I'm going to be sharing this out with Brian to everybody who registered. We'll get a link to the replay. And then make sure you are following Parallax because we've got a lot of new things coming, more webinars. We're going to be launching a podcast. We got the newsletter coming back. It's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you're informed and following. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you.